The food that kept an entire Norse civilization alive through 6 months of Arctic darkness has been completely erased from modern kitchens. And no, we're not talking about whatever sad protein bar you had for breakfast. While we obsess over acai bowls and overpriced oat milk lattes, we've completely abandoned the most battle-tested foods in human history. Foods that kept warriors rowing across the North Atlantic. Foods that fed entire villages through winters so brutal they'd make your central heating cry. These weren't foods chosen for flavor. They were chosen because they worked. Because in a world where one bad harvest or one brutal winter meant your entire community starved, every single food decision was a matter of life and death. And here's what's extraordinary. Modern science, and with all its labs, all its technology, all its nutritional research, keeps arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion. The Vikings had it figured out. The fermentation methods they used, the preservation techniques they developed, the parts of animals they refused to waste, all of it is being rediscovered and validated right now in the 21st century. So today, we're going through 15 of these forgotten foods. 15 things that fed one of the most formidable civilizations in human history that modern science is only now beginning to understand and that most of us have never heard of. Number 1, skyr, pronounced skyr. And before you say anything, no, it's not yogurt. Vikings would have been offended by that comparison. This thick, white, almost cheese-like fermented dairy product was a Viking staple for over 1,000 years. And here's the thing about skyr. It's essentially fat-free and packs more protein per gram than almost anything else you can eat. We're talking roughly 11 grams of protein per 100 grams. Your fancy Greek yogurt wishes it had those numbers. The genius wasn't just the nutrition, it was the preservation. Skyr could last weeks in cold Scandinavian conditions without refrigeration. For a civilization where winter meant nothing fresh was growing anywhere, that was basically magic in a bowl. How did they make it? Leftover whey from previous batches got mixed into fresh milk, which triggered fermentation. Zero waste, infinite supply. The whey left over after straining became a drink called blanda, mixed with water. Vikings literally used every single part of the process. Modern nutritionists spent decades calling fermented dairy a niche health food. Turns out Vikings had the gut microbiome figured out around 900 AD, cool of science to catch up eventually. Today you can find skyr in most supermarkets labeled as some trendy Icelandic superfood for $4 a cup. Number 2, speaking of things that would make modern people uncomfortable, let's talk about the food so extreme that Anthony Bourdain called it the single worst thing he'd ever put in his mouth. Hakkarl, fermented Greenlandic shark. Now, before you click away, hear the logic out. Because this was genuinely brilliant survival engineering. Greenlandic shark, the raw fish, is actually toxic to humans. It contains high concentrations of trimethylamine oxide, which breaks down into compounds that will make you very, very sick. So you can't eat it fresh. But Vikings looked at an enormous shark that thrives in Arctic waters, a massive, reliable food source, and thought, challenge accepted. The process? Bury the shark in gravel for 6 to 12 weeks. The pressure drains the toxic fluids. Then hang it to dry for another 4 to 5 months. The fermentation process breaks down the toxic compounds completely. The result is an ammonia-smelling, rubber-textured protein source that keeps essentially forever and can sustain life in conditions where almost nothing else was available. Surviving an Icelandic winter was the goal, and Hakkarl did exactly that for generations. Modern food scientists now study the fermentation process as a model for toxin neutralization. Number 3, if Hakkarl was the Viking solution to this, food will kill you. Stockfish was the solution to a different problem. How do we feed 80 warriors on a ship for 3 months? Stockfish is simply cod or other whitefish, gutted, tied together, and hung on wooden racks in the cold Arctic air for 2 to 3 months until it's completely desiccated. No salt, no smoke, just wind and cold. The result loses about 80% of its weight in water, and what's left is basically pure protein that keeps for years. Years. Your emergency granola bars are embarrassed. Here's the nutritional punchline. By weight, dried stockfish contains more protein than fresh beef, more calcium than milk, more B12 than almost anything else on the Viking menu. The Vikings essentially invented the world's first long-distance food supply chain around stockfish. It fueled their Atlantic expeditions. It was traded from Norway to the rest of Europe for centuries. Medieval economies literally ran on this dried fish. Modern nutritionists are now studying stockfish preparation because the drying process creates unique peptide chains not found in fresh fish. Number 4, here's one that surprises people. Vikings ate seaweed, a lot of it, not because they thought it was delicious, because when you live on a coastline surrounded by ocean and winter lasts half the year, you eat what's available. And what was always available was seaweed. Specifically, they consumed dulse, a reddish-purple seaweed that grows on rocky North Atlantic shores, and kelp, which they called sule. And here's the thing, modern science keeps rediscovering. Coastal seaweeds are nutritional powerhouses. Dulse has more iron than beef, more potassium than bananas, high levels of iodine, which prevents thyroid problems that were absolutely destroying inland populations during the same period. But it gets more interesting. Dulse, when pan-fried, reportedly tastes like bacon. When researchers at Oregon State University discovered this in 2014, food media treated it like a revelation. They also used kelp practically. The large fronds were used to wrap and steam other foods, essentially nature's baking parchment. They composted leftover seaweed as fertilizer. They used it medicinally for skin conditions and wound care. Today, dried seaweed snacks are a booming health food industry. Number 5, every Viking winter had a moment in late summer when preservation instinct kicked in. Stock everything, dry everything, ferment everything. And one of the most important things to stock were crowberries. These small, black, slightly bitter berries, called kreckling in Old Norse, carpeted Scandinavian heathlands and were aggressively harvested before the first frost. Why crowberries specifically? Because they had one superpower that almost no other berry shared. They kept naturally through winter, frozen in the ground, preserved under snow, still edible in spring. No processing required. Nature did the storage work. Nutritionally, crowberries are dense with vitamin C, antioxidants, and anthocyanins. The same compounds in blueberries that everyone's so excited about now, except crowberries have a higher concentration. Vikings would eat them fresh in late summer, cook them into a fermented berry porridge, mix them into dried meat for long voyages, and use them medicinally for digestive issues. Modern pharmacological research, published in the last decade, has identified several unique antioxidant compounds in crowberries not found in other berries. Some show potential neuroprotective properties. Vikings were eating these things off the heathland for free. We're now putting the extracts in $80 supplements. Number 6, let's address the uncomfortable one directly. Vikings wasted nothing. Absolutely nothing. When an animal was slaughtered, an animal slaughter was a major event that fed a community. Every single part got used, which brings us to blodmør, blood sausage, made by mixing fresh blood with fat, grain, and spices, then stuffed into cleaned intestine casings and cooked. Now, before modern sensibilities kick in, consider the nutritional logic. Blood is extraordinarily rich in iron, zinc, and B12. The fat provided essential calories for cold climate survival. The grains stretched it further. Wrapped in intestine casing, it preserved well. In a world with no supplements and no grocery stores, blood sausage was essentially a complete nutritional package from an animal that was already being fully used. Nothing went to rot. Nothing was wasted. In a climate where wasting food could literally mean dying in February, that efficiency was life or death. Modern nutritionists studying traditional Nordic diets have identified that this nose-to-tail approach provided nutrient coverage that was actually superior to many modern selective eating patterns. The parts of animals we now discard were nutritionally some of the most valuable. Blood sausage still exists across Scandinavia, the British Isles, and much of Europe. It's making a quiet comeback in farm-to-table restaurants, being called heritage ingredients. Vikings just called it dinner. Number 7, spring in Viking Scandinavia came with a very specific smell drifting through the forests. If you followed your nose through the birch trees in April, you'd find carpets of broad green leaves with white flowers covering the forest floor. Wild garlic, called ramsluk in Old Norse, and Vikings knew exactly what they had. The timing was everything. After months of preserved, dried, salted, and fermented food, wild garlic was one of the first fresh plants to emerge in spring. And it was absolutely loaded with vitamin C, exactly what bodies depleted by winter desperately needed. But the benefits went further. Wild garlic contains allicin, the active compound in regular garlic that modern medicine recognizes as having antibacterial, antifungal, and cardiovascular benefits. It's also rich in iron and manganese. Vikings ate the leaves raw in spring, cooked them into soups, dried and powdered them as seasoning for preserved meats, and used them as a basic medicine for respiratory infections and digestive problems. Modern research now confirms that allicin compounds in wild garlic are more bioavailable, meaning more easily absorbed by the body than those in cultivated garlic. The wild version, which grew abundantly and free across Scandinavia, was actually more medicinally potent than what we cultivate today. We traded it for pre-peeled garlic cloves in a plastic tub. Number 8. This one deserves its own entry because it represents something remarkable. Viking functional food. Butter was already a staple. Dairy farming was central to Norse agriculture. But coastal communities developed the practice of blending dried dulse seaweed directly into butter before storage. The result wasn't just flavored butter, it was a preservation technique that worked in two directions. The salt naturally present in dried seaweed helped preserve the butter longer, and the fat in butter preserved the seaweed's nutrients and made them more bioavailable. Modern nutritional science has a term for this: fat-soluble nutrient delivery. Several key compounds in seaweed are absorbed significantly better when consumed with fat. Vikings figured this out through practical observation centuries before the biochemistry was understood. Dulse butter was packed into wooden barrels, sealed with more salt, and stored in cool cellars or buried underground. In good conditions, it kept for over a year. Number 9. Here's where Viking food ingenuity gets genuinely extraordinary. In the hardest winters, the ones where grain stores ran low and desperation set in, there was a last resort that kept people alive when everything else ran out. Pine bark bread. The inner bark of Scots pine, harvested in spring when the sap was running, was stripped, dried, ground into a coarse flour, and mixed with whatever grain was left to stretch the bread supply further. This sounds like pure starvation food, and sometimes it was. But the nutritional reality is more interesting. The inner bark of Scots pine contains significant amounts of carbohydrates in the form of starches and sugars. It also contains vitamin C, something critically absent from most winter diets. And it contains compounds called oligomeric proanthocyanidins, which are now sold as pine bark extract supplements for their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. What Vikings were consuming as emergency bread was, from a phytochemical perspective, a genuinely nutritive food source. Not just filler. Modern researchers studying traditional Scandinavian food history have found evidence of pine bark flour use stretching back thousands of years. It wasn't just crisis eating, it was embedded in the food culture as a seasonal ingredient. Today, pine bark extract is a health supplement that costs about $30 a bottle. Vikings scraped it off trees for free and made bread with it. Number 10. Vikings were not big on wasting bread either, which is how they invented one of the most nutritionally interesting breakfast foods of the medieval world. Ulebrød, literally beer bread, was a fermented grain porridge made from stale leftover bread soaked in the weak ale that was a Viking dietary staple, then cooked down into a thick, tangy porridge. The key word is fermented. The process of soaking bread in ale, which itself was already partially fermented, created a double fermentation that significantly increased the bioavailability of minerals like iron, zinc, and magnesium that are normally bound up in whole grains. In other words, by soaking their old bread in beer, Vikings were unlocking nutrients that would otherwise have passed straight through them. Modern nutritional science calls this process phytate reduction through fermentation. It's the same principle behind sourdough bread, and it's now recognized as one reason why traditional grain-based diets actually kept people healthier than the raw numbers would suggest. Vikings stumbled onto the chemistry through practical tradition. Number 11. This one is uncomfortable for some modern audiences, but it's important. Vikings ate horse meat regularly, and the reasons were both practical and ceremonial. Practically, horses were the most protein-rich large animal regularly available. A single horse could feed a village. Horse fat has a high concentration of omega-3 fatty acids relative to other terrestrial animals, an adaptation to cold climates. Horse meat is also lower in saturated fat and higher in iron than beef. Ceremonially, the consumption of horse meat was deeply tied to Norse religious practice. Eating horse was part of rituals honoring Odin and was consumed at major celebrations. When Christianity spread through Scandinavia, the church actively banned horse meat consumption, specifically because of its association with pagan ritual. That ban stuck so hard that most of Western Europe still doesn't eat horse today. The nutritional irony is significant. Horse meat is now recognized by sports nutritionists as one of the leanest, most iron-dense red meats available. Competitive athletes in parts of Europe where it's still consumed regularly show measurably higher iron levels. Vikings weren't eating horse because they were primitive. They were eating the most nutritionally efficient large animal available to them. Number 12. Every Viking child learned the hard way that stinging nettles hurt, and then every Viking adult taught them the more important lesson: they also feed you. Stinging nettles, nestle in Old Norse, were a spring staple across Scandinavia. The key to eating them is simple. Cooking or drying destroys the stinging compounds completely. What you're left with is a dark, iron-rich green that tastes like a more intense version of spinach. And the nutrition is remarkable. Nettles contain more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk per gram, significant levels of vitamins A, C, and K, high amounts of magnesium and potassium. Vikings made nettle soup as one of the first fresh foods of spring, using it as a direct remedy for the vitamin deficiencies that accumulated over winter. They dried nettles for year-round use as a seasoning. They used the fibrous stems to make rope and coarse fabric. And they used nettle preparations medicinally for joint pain and urinary problems. Modern clinical research has confirmed anti-inflammatory compounds in stinging nettles, particularly for arthritis and allergic rhinitis. Nettle root extract is now in pharmacies across Europe. Number 13. This one will either fascinate you or horrify you. Possibly both. Archaeologists across Scandinavia and the British Isles have discovered large wooden containers buried in peat bogs, dating from the Viking Age and earlier. Inside butter, sometimes hundreds of years old. This wasn't accidental preservation. This was deliberate Viking cold storage. Peat bogs maintain a remarkably stable cold temperature year-round. They're highly acidic, low in oxygen, and antibacterial in nature. Vikings figured out that burying butter in sealed wooden containers in boggy ground was one of the most reliable ways to age and store dairy fat for extended periods. The aged butter developed strong, complex, almost cheese-like flavors from slow fermentation. Some samples recovered by archaeologists were reportedly still technically edible, with a flavor described as strong, waxy, and intensely savory. This is essentially the same principle as aged cheese applied to butter. The slow, controlled fermentation in a cold, low-oxygen environment develops flavor compounds and also breaks down certain proteins and fats into forms that are more easily digested. Number 14. If crowberries were the practical winter berry, cloudberries were the treasure. These amber golden berries, called multe in Norse, grew only in Arctic and subarctic bogs and mountain heaths. They couldn't be cultivated, they couldn't be farmed. You had to go find them, and they fruited for only a few weeks each year, which made them extraordinarily valuable. Cloudberries contain 4 times more vitamin C than oranges. They're rich in vitamin A, vitamin E, and omega-3 fatty acids, unusual for a fruit. They also contain ellagic acid, a compound now studied for its potential anti-cancer properties. But the practical reason Vikings prized them wasn't just nutrition, it was preservation. Cloudberries are naturally high in benzoic acid, the same compound used as a food preservative today. This means they preserve themselves almost entirely without any intervention. Stored in their own juice in cool conditions, cloudberries keep for over a year without fermenting or rotting. Vikings stored them in wooden barrels or birch bark containers. The berries could be transported on voyages as a concentrated vitamin source. They were traded as a luxury commodity. In Norway today, cloudberries remain so culturally significant that picking them from private land is a protected right. Locals only, no commercial harvesting. Fresh cloudberries in season cost more than most other berries at Scandinavian markets. Number 15. We end with the food that does everything. Angelica root, vanrot in Old Norse, was arguably the most useful plant in the entire Viking food and medicine system. And almost nobody outside Scandinavia has heard of it. The whole plant was edible. Young stems were eaten raw in spring like a vegetable. Crisp, slightly sweet, with a flavor somewhere between celery and juniper. The roots were cooked and eaten, or dried and ground into a flour. The seeds and leaves were used as seasoning. The roots were also boiled down for medicinal use. Medicinally, Angelica was applied to practically everything. Digestive problems, fever, respiratory infections, fatigue. It was the Viking equivalent of a medicine cabinet, and modern pharmacology has been very interested in why. Angelica root contains compounds called furanocoumarins and flavonoids that show antimicrobial and antifungal activity in laboratory conditions. It contains significant amounts of vitamin C and iron. It has real documented effects on digestive function. The compound angelican directly stimulates digestive enzyme activity. The Vikings weren't applying folk magic. They were using a plant that had genuine pharmacological action. Angelica is still cultivated in Iceland, where it never stopped being used. In Norway, there's an active movement to return it to mainstream cooking. Nordic Michelin-starred restaurants have featured it prominently. The rest of the world is slowly discovering what Icelandic grandmothers never forgot. What these 15 foods have in common isn't just history, it's intelligence. Viking food wasn't primitive. It was a precisely calibrated response to extreme environmental conditions. Cold, darkness, scarcity, long ocean voyages, developed over centuries through observation, experimentation, and the very practical motivation of not dying. Modern science keeps circling back to the same conclusion. The fermentation they used improved nutrient absorption. The plants they foraged were pharmacologically active. The preservation techniques they developed were genuinely sophisticated. The nose-to-tail approach to animal use provided nutritional coverage we've since abandoned. We spent about 200 years building a global industrial food system that optimized for shelf life, visual appearance, and shipping convenience. And now nutrition researchers spend their careers rediscovering what people figured out between 793 and 1066 AD in the North Atlantic. The Vikings didn't have supermarkets. They had something better. They had no choice but to understand exactly what food actually does. If you want to see how they turned these foods into fuel for some of the most audacious voyages in human history, including the one that beat Columbus to America by 500 years, that video is coming next week. Until then.